Welcome. It's so good to see so many of you here today and interested in learning about security. It's been a busy summer for my family and I with housing changes. The house next door to where I live, and just outside my office window, has been remodeled to have an attached garage addition. So now that addition extends to a mere 10 to 15 feet from my office window. The sounds of demolition and construction have been an integral part of my summer, including the sounds of crowbars, hammers, and saws. I've watched as the workers have worked together with precision to lay the footings, to pour the concrete floor with the frost footing, and to build the walls with openings for windows and doors. What has been the key to their precision and being able to work together? It's the blueprint. A blueprint is a result of good planning. And in order to develop a good blueprint, you have to ask the right questions. As Rich Braden said in the special session yesterday, by changing the questions, we changed the solutions. So we need to ask the right questions in order to build a good solution. And today we're going to discuss the questions for building a blueprint for security. My name is Sarah Stickford, and I'm from Cedar Falls, Iowa. I grew up in a family business, an electrical contractor, that was started by my grandpa, Erwin Stickford, over 60 years ago. I have a lot of construction-related memories, including blueprints in the vans, layered with dirt. And I remember the tool pouches the men wore, full of tools that I didn't understand and wondered how they used them. When my dad would come home from work, he would set his tool pouch down on the floor, and I would explore it, pulling the tools out one by one to see what they were and try and figure out how he used them. My dad regularly warned me that those tools could hurt me, and he gave me a healthy fear and respect for them. My favorite tool in his tool pouch was the wire stripper. I just learned recently that my grandpa used to use a knife to strip wire. My dad, when he started working, he asked him, "Why are you using a knife to strip the wire?" And my grandpa said, "I don't like the tool that's available." And he had become fast and efficient at using a knife. My grandpa showed him the tool that he didn't like. He didn't like it because the wire stripping part was below the pivot point, and it was awkward to get the tool around the wire to strip it. My dad said, "I'm going to find the tool that has the wire stripping portion above the pivot point." My dad went out to find it, and he showed it to my grandpa. And my grandpa immediately converted because that was the right tool for the job, and it was fast and efficient. And he never went back to using the knife. You may be wondering what the tools are within my tool pouch. My background is in accounting. I'm a certified public accountant. I'm a certified QuickBooks Online Pro Advisor. And I'm a certified FileMaker developer for 5 versions. I'm from the state of Iowa, where there's fields of opportunities. I feel right at home with all the acres of cornfields and soybean fields and the hog farms. There's also many highly technical companies in Iowa, including Rockwell Collins. It's a supplier of aviation and high-integrity solutions for government and commercial customers around the world. I worked for Rockwell Collins as an internal auditor to do financial, Sarbanes-Oxley operational audits of the internal controls and IT audits. For those audits, I traveled throughout the United States, as well as France and Mexico. I also enjoy personal travel, and 2 of my favorite destinations are Mexico and Cyprus. You may wonder why I'm here presenting. When I left Rockwell Collins, I went back to our family business. And at the time, it was going to be a short-term position. So I did administrative and data entry roles. It quickly became clear that I could be there much longer, and I was given the opportunity to rewrite their FileMaker solution that was developed with FileMaker version 5 and 6. I took them up on the offer because I knew I was interested in learning more about FileMaker. At that point, another developer gave me a copy of his template solution, and I studied it because I wanted to learn more about the security features. I wanted to know how they worked. When I got into it, I saw that he used global fields, scripts, and he did not use the native security features. So I asked him, and he said, "This is much simpler. You can just use the scripts and the fields, and it's just as effective." I believed him, and that was a mistake. For another vertical market solution, I used a licensing plugin, and I later found out that it was not effective, and I had to abandon it. I could have caused the failure of our family business, and I realize that now looking back. At the time that I used the weak security model based on the other developer's template, there was an employee there that if he had been shrewd and curious enough, he could have taken all of the data or destroyed it. To make matters worse, when he left Stickford Electric, he went to a local competitor in violation of his non-compete agreement. You may have seen the word ersatz within the forums or the community postings and wondered what that word really means. Ersatz is a stronger word than substitute. It's an adjective, and it means being a usually artificial and inferior substitute or imitation. When I think of the word ersatz, I think of a door chain lock. Because if the garage next door that's being built, if they had installed a door chain lock, instead of using the door lock within the doorknob, I would have asked the contractor why. Because we all know that a door chain lock can be pushed open or kicked open, and it can let in weather or insects or animals. A door chain lock is obviously an inferior substitute to the doorknob lock. The problem with ersatz security is that it creates new vulnerabilities, it creates a false sense of security, and it actually lowers the overall level of security. Here's a screenshot that I copied from the other developer's template. Using security based on repeating fields, a plain text password, and the system set the security permissions to global variables upon the opening script. There's many ways to stop a script from running or to prevent the opening script from running. I took it a step further and added a roles table because I didn't like managing all of the permissions at an individual task level, and I wanted to be able to assign a role to the employees. Both of these methods were flawed and extremely vulnerable because they relied upon a script running, and a script can be stopped in multiple ways. It was like the door chain lock, ersatz security. It created new vulnerabilities and lowered the level of security. The whole time I was using that solution, I had the nagging question in my mind: why are the native security features within the platform if I don't need to use them and the way I've been doing it is equivalent? I finally reached out to Stephen Blackwell, security expert within the FileMaker community, as I perceived he was the black belt of security within the forums, to ask him, because I knew he would tell me the truth and tell me, even if it wasn't what I want, even if he would tell me how I'd been doing it was wrong. And I did learn how wrong I had been. He encouraged me to pursue formal FileMaker training. And I learned to prove the truth of the quote that he so often quotes from Will. I learned to prove the truth of the quote by Will Rogers. That it's not what you don't know that will hurt you, but it's what you do know that isn't so. I followed his advice and pursued the formal training with John Mark Osborne, a well-known trainer and developer within the FileMaker community, and Stephen Blackwell. And that was the best decision of my FileMaker career. It transformed my skills. I was actually already certified in version 9 at that point, but this was a defining moment in my FileMaker career when I pursued formal training. And the reason why John Mark Osborne and Stephen Blackwell taught me how to think while developing. I'm interested to know why each of you are here. The objectives for my session are that you would develop an understanding of what threats and vulnerabilities to consider when planning a solution. That you would understand and learn the foundational principles of FileMaker platform security. That you would learn why using the built-in FileMaker platform security features is important. And that you would learn how to implement and manage privilege sets, the functional roles as native privilege sets. As I mentioned, you have to ask the right questions to develop a good blueprint. The questions we're going to discuss are, who does security impact? Why do we need security? What is security? When do we need security? And where do we need security? People are at the heart of security because when there's a breach, it's people that are ultimately impacted, either financially or emotionally or otherwise. Therefore, the first question is, who does security impact? Security impacts the FileMaker platform client. They want their business to continue and go on. They don't want to have their brand damaged, and they don't want to be sued. I mentioned that I am a CPA, but I'm not a tax accountant. I hired a tax accountant for the first time for my 2017 taxes. When I went to the first meeting with this tax accountant and took my paperwork, I took it in paper format because I didn't want to transmit it electronically, because I knew that through an insecure email. At that meeting, the tax accountant showed me that at the bottom of her emails, there's a link that I could send her information securely, encrypted. The tax year went fine, but after it was done, I sent her an email to ask her a question for my 2018 planning. And when her reply came back, I was surprised to see that there was an attachment, because I didn't expect any attachments. When I opened it, I was shocked, because what it was the documents I had manually provided to her with my personal information on it. And she'd scanned them in and emailed it to me without using the secure tool that she had available. I asked her about it, and she said she was only moderately concerned. And I didn't like that answer, so I talked to her IT manager, not knowing if it was a training or an internal control issue, and he had the same apathetic response. I have fired them as my tax accountant and found a new tax accountant for 2018. Prevention is much cheaper than remediation. And it would have been so easy for her to have sent me that file using the encryption tool. Security also impacts the end user. Since the last DevCon, I've been working to develop an app for the men in the field to do their time and material data entry. It's still in the beta format, but I had to develop that app with the end user in mind, because these men are not tech savvy. And they don't want to feel vulnerable while they're doing their job. I don't want to give them access to data that they shouldn't be changing and make them get in trouble with the office. So security impacts the end user. Security impacts the person or entity whose data is stored. And this is especially important when it's sensitive data, like financial, medical, or otherwise. When I opened that email, it made me feel raw, vulnerable, and exposed. I had to tell my parents as well, because it included their information as well. And they also expressed feelings of disbelief and betrayal. Security impacts the person whose data is stored. Security impacts you as the developer. And now, with the Workplace Innovation Platform, more and more in-house developers are the developers and need to learn about security. Your professional reputation is at stake. I probably would not be here speaking if Stickford Electrica had gotten breached when they had such weak security. Stickford Electric probably would have hired a different developer or completely abandoned the FileMaker platform if they had been able to continue in business. I also I can't stand the thought of how I would have lived with the knowledge of if Stickford Electric had been destroyed and it had been built on years of trust and integrity, and by my not educating myself on security, to have destroyed all that. Prevention is cheaper than remediation, and security impacts you as the developer. So we've discussed who does security impact. The next question is, why do we need security? Well, buildings have external threats. In Iowa, the two primary external threats that we have are floods and tornadoes. Just last month, a tornado came through Marshalltown, Iowa, and did a lot of destruction. In 2008, we had severe destruction. In May, an EF5 tornado came through Parkersburg and leveled much of the city. Stickford Electrica had just started a project with a large metal-heavy gang box with tools in it for storage. That entire gang box was blown away, and none of its contents or the gang box were ever found or recovered. I know that there were businesses that lost computers and backup drives in that tornado. The next month, there was severe flooding all along the Cedar River. Many businesses ceased to exist, and many took years to recover. And I'm sure many computers and backup drives were lost in that flooding as well. Just as buildings have external threats, there's oftentimes internal threats that are more common and ongoing. Prison cells, correctional facilities, and police stations have jail cells. And sometimes the people inside the building are a greater threat, and the buildings have to be built with special materials to protect from them, such as stainless steel doors or reinforced locks. Why do we need security? We need it because there are external and internal threats. But the main purpose of security are to protect the business interests so that it can continue for years. Many businesses could not exist without the security in place to comply with regulations. And we don't want to be sued. None of us want to be sued. No business does. And security also protects our intellectual property, because that is our primary asset in many of our businesses. We need security because there are threat agents. This doesn't say attackers, because I don't think my tax accountant had malicious intent when she sent me that email. Threat agents are not necessarily people with malicious intent, and threat agents are not always people. So we need security because there are threat agents that are looking for vulnerabilities in order to attack digital assets or to have adverse impact on digital assets. The risk analysis process is to determine where the likelihood of an adverse impact on a digital asset is most likely to happen. There are 4 levels of adverse impact that you can measure, ranging from limited severe to serious severe to severe adverse. Excuse me, I need to start over. Limited adverse to serious adverse to severe adverse to catastrophic adverse. And you may notice that the degrees of impact are on the people, the assets, the operations, and the reputation of the organization that owns the digital asset. And you're not necessarily measuring the adverse impact on the digital asset. When my tax accountant emailed me that file insecurely, it did lower the confidentiality of my personal data. But the adverse impact was on myself and my parents. And it was also on the tax accounting firm, because I had a good image of that tax accounting firm, and my lawyer had referred me to them. But their brand was damaged in my mind. I could never refer anyone to them again, and their reputation was damaged. So the adverse impact is on the people, the assets, the operations, and the reputation that owns the asset that's breached. The purpose of doing a risk analysis process is in order that limited resources can be allocated to the areas where there's a higher level of adverse impact, or a higher risk of a higher level of adverse impact. We've discussed why do we need security. The next question is, what is security? Security are the measures taken to guard against crime, sabotage, espionage, or escape. There are many mechanisms within this FileMaker platform that are in there to guard against. Excuse me. Okay. The security mechanisms within the FileMaker platform are there to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability, and the resilience of the assets. My grandpa was a man of confidentiality. I could go to him and ask him questions and tell him things and know that he wouldn't tell anyone else. At his visitation, several people told me that they had confided in him. And I know that for each person that told me that, there were many more people that trusted him and confided in him and never told me, or would never tell me. Confidentiality within the FileMaker platform means limiting the access to the system and the data to only the people that are authorized to access them. Listed are 6 factors that impact confidentiality. The first 2 specifically impact confidentiality, and the other 4 impact all 4: confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resilience. The first 2 are administrative access and physical access to the server computer. If someone can get access to these, they can get access to the files and to the data within them. The other one is strong credentials. Are there strong passwords on the accounts? And how are the roles defined? Are they defined according to the need-to-know principle? How are the privilege sets set up? Are they defined according to the rule of least privileges and the need-to-know principle? So, is a person only given access to the data they need for their job and nothing more? And finally, are the security processes in place to limit people from escalating their privileges beyond what they should be? Does anyone here know what you put your faith in, the integrity of when you came in the room? Yes? The floor? Yes? The air conditioning? Yes. I'm sorry? The environment? It's not. What? Yes, and me? That wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking of the chairs you're sitting in. I sat in a chair in Mexico that collapsed underneath me, and that was not a fun experience. You each placed your faith in the chair you're sitting in, that it wouldn't collapse underneath you. Integrity means ensuring that the data is sound and trustworthy, and that's unimpaired. I developed a solution for a doctor in California, and he depends upon the integrity of the data within that solution to make decisions for his patient's care. Factors that impact integrity are the hardware configurations. Particularly of importance are the hard drive structure, including the backups. And the hard drives and the battery backups. The backup procedures are also important. You need to know where the backups stored. How are the backups being created? Are they being tested? And availability is increasingly important in today's world. More and more personal homes and businesses are being installed with generators because we value availability so much more. Availability within the FileMaker platform means ensuring that the data is readily accessible and attainable when it's needed. Factors that impact availability are the internet connectivity. We all know that a cloud solution is worthless if there's not internet connectivity. AWS was selected for FileMaker Cloud in part because of its assertion of availability. Some other things that impact availability are the hardware configurations, and if there's battery backups in place to prevent the files from crashing or forcibly closing if there's a power outage. In addition, attackers can destroy the data. They can manipulate the data. And the backups of the data are a primary target for attackers. When I think of resilience, I think of the human brain. Because after all, our bodies are the building in which we each live. You may have heard of stroke victims, 2 stroke victims that had strokes that were in a similar part of the brain with the same size of bleeding. They received the same degree of care and about the same timing. One person fully recovered, and one person never recovered or died. What was the difference between the 2 individuals? It most likely was their health prior to the stroke. Resilience within the FileMaker platform means the ability to readily recover after a breach or impact. Breach, attack, or natural disaster. And factors that impact resilience are the backup procedures and the written procedures. The overall system health prior to the impact, the attack, are what's key. As Stephen Blackwell says, it's the strength of the attacker. It's the strength of the defender, not the attacker, that will determine the outcome. The overall system health prior to the attack is key. The written procedures documents are important because if the key person is gone or unavailable after an attack, how will someone else know what to do and to recover? So those written procedures documents need to be in place, and someone else needs to know where they are at. So we discussed the risk analysis already, but we started with the threat agents. And if we consider what the definition of security is, the measures taken to guard against espionage or sabotage, crime, attack, or escape, we'll realize that that is actually the reverse of what the risk analysis diagram should be. Because if you're guarding something, you need to have a defensive posture. versus an offensive posture. And the risk analysis process needs to start with the assets that you're seeking to protect. Once you know what assets you're trying to protect, you can consider how those assets could be adversely impacted and what the adverse impact level would be. And how was the asset breached? You need to consider what the level of adverse impact would be if the confidentiality is breached, if the integrity is breached, if the availability is breached, and if the resilience is breached. There may be a different level of adverse impact for each aspect of security. For example, when my personal information was breached, the confidentiality was lowered. I considered it to be a serious adverse impact. If another person had been breached, they may have considered it limited and not made any change. Each person, each organization needs to do the analysis to determine if an asset is breached, what the adverse impact would be. Once you have determined what the levels of adverse impact would be for each asset, then you can start considering the various forms of attack. And where are the vulnerabilities that could lead to that form of attack? You really can't consider the vulnerabilities until you have considered the adverse impact and what the attacks could be. The goal within security is to close the vulnerabilities, to block the threat agents, and to mitigate the adverse impacts. We've just considered what is security. Next, we need to consider when do we need security? I'm feeling funny. We need to consider security during planning because the attacker is always watching and we need to think as the attacker thinks. So we need security during planning. Why? Because we must think as the attacker thinks. As Chris Pogue of the Newark's Black Report says, when organizations consider their cybersecurity strategies, they invite IT, legal, and human resources to the table. But the one person they forget to invite is the bad guy. It's no wonder that so many security strategies are misdirected. So if we need to think as the attacker thinks, how does the attacker think? The attacker looks at the controlling mechanisms within a file, and then he asks, can I break them? Can I manipulate them? Can I bypass them? Or can I turn them off or ignore them? A good example of bypassing security controls is the ancient city of Babylon. The city had impenetrable double walls with 8 gates. And the Euphrates River ran down the center of the city, underneath the city walls. The enemy was watching and persistent. One night, while King Belshazzar was hosting a large party, the enemy took advantage of this opportunity, and they diverted and held back the river and went in through the dry riverbed. Now there were spikes going from the wall to the bottom of the riverbed, but the enemy had figured out how to bypass the security mechanism, and they went in through the dry riverbed, defeated the city, and killed King Belshazzar, excuse me. The enemy was led by Cyrus the Great. So when do we need security? We need security during planning, but we also need it ongoing and continuously. Why? Because the enemy is always watching, and the threats constantly change and evolve. Public schools have had to be retrofitted with camera systems and door access systems because the threats are constantly changing and evolving and have grown. Likewise, FileMaker solutions may need to be reevaluated for security features if they were developed in prior versions, because there may be new features added in more current versions that are meant to address the current threats, and you need to implement them to old solutions. So you need to ongoing and continuously evaluate the security within a solution. Why do you need or when do you need to consider security? Ongoing and continuously. Because sometimes the enemy likes to be quiet. You do not want an attacker to get into your system and out without being noticed. A key to watching for the enemies is the server logs. You need to monitor them ongoing so that you can detect unusual behavior. Dwell time is the amount of days between when an attack occurs and when it is discovered. And discovery source is who discovers it, either someone internally or externally. According to the 2018 Mondiant Interims report, the internal discovery time is 42.5 days. And when it's externally discovered, a breach is externally discovered, that time increases to 124.5 days. So does it really matter if it's longer if they're discovered? It does matter, because the longer an attacker is within a system, the more damage they have time to do. So we've discussed when do we need security. The last question we're going to discuss is where do we need security? Just as a building has many general security features to protect against the wide variety of attacks, a FileMaker system does as well. The general security features on a building are the door locks, the window locks, perhaps there's an alarm system, and procedures such as not leaving your door unlocked at night, or when you not leaving your windows unlocked when you go on vacation. Attackers can be clever and try to figure out new ways to attack a house or a system, but they don't need to if the old ways continue to work. For example, if they can follow someone into a building that has door access controls, they can bypass the security mechanisms if they watch for windows that are left open when you're on vacation, or a hidden key that's left in a very visible location. FileMaker platform has many native security features, but the on first window open script is not a native security feature. Scripts can be stopped or prevented from running in multiple ways. The general security features within the FileMaker platform that we're going to discuss are the strong passwords, file access protection, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, field level encryption, and fine-grained privilege sets. The first one is strong passwords. Strong passwords protect the user authentication and who can get into the system. They're used on local accounts and you can determine the quality of a password when it is being set. The quality is based on the length, the complexity, and the entropy. The complexity represents what types of characters are included, and the entropy is the randomness or the lack of predictability. In today's world, with mobile devices and segregated systems, identity is the new security. The network perimeters are disappearing. FileMaker 16 started to address this trend with using the OAuth providers. And the third party of Google, Amazon, or Azure, Microsoft Azure, now handles the user authentication. I developed a spreadsheet to do an analysis of the password quality and algorithm for setting passwords within FileMaker to give you an idea of how length, complexity, and entropy apply to the quality settings of weak, moderate, and strong. You can download this as a part of my session materials and look at it in your own time. File access protection reminds me of the Superbox lockbox that sat outside the house my parents had for sale this summer. Anyone that wanted to get in the house had to be individually authorized to get into that box. If a realtor or inspector wanted to get in, they had to be authorized. The keys sat in that box. File access protection protects the data and the schema of a file, and it's turned on within File, Manage Security, and File Access. And it's just checking a simple checkbox. But by checking that simple checkbox, you block a lot of threat agents that could otherwise enter your system and attack it. The next native security feature within the FileMaker platform is encryption at rest. This protects the data and the intellectual property within closed files. It's important for hosted files as well, in case someone would get a copy of the files. But it is especially important for backup copies of files, because backup copies of files are a primary attack target. Commercially, hacker tools cannot break this or don't work on the file that has this enabled. And you have to use FileMaker Pro Advanced to implement or enable it. Here with this security feature, the strength of the password is the key. So if you use a weak password to encrypt your files, your encryption is not very strong. The next type of encryption, encryption in transit, doesn't rely upon the strength of a password. It relies upon an SSL certificate being installed on the server. Encryption in transit protects data as it's being passed from the client to the server and from the server to the client. Field level encryption is new within version 16, and it also relies upon the strength of an encryption password. Field level encryption is important because it can protect data that a user may have access to normally within their privilege set. In order to enable field level encryption, you start with either text or container data and use the encryption key and the crypt-encrypt function to create a data file. And in order to decrypt it, you use that encrypted data file as well as your encryption password and the crypt-decrypt function to return to your original text or container field data. Field level encryption is a tool that you want to have a healthy fear and respect for, because if you don't use it correctly, it has great potential to hurt you. So you want to play around with it on non-production files and learn how it works before you implement it into live files. The final feature within the platform that I'm going to discuss are fine-grained privilege sets. Fine-grained privilege sets are a strong way to protect what a user is able to do within a solution. And they need to be defined according to the rule of least privileges. I actually am working on a solution to demonstrate how they work. And I will make it available via Twitter when it's ready. So if you follow me on Twitter at Sarah Stickford, I will let you know when that's available. So where do we need security? Well, we need multiple layers of security throughout the FileMaker platform. And there are multiple security mechanisms available to offer these multiple layers. What is the most important layer? Well, as Brian Krebs, cybersecurity expert, says, we need to have defense in depth. We need to have multiple layers of security and not rely too much on a single layer of security. And you are the most important layer of security. Just as my tax accountant emailed me the file insecurely, and she could have used the encryption tool, but she didn't. She was the weakest layer of security. She was the vulnerability. And just as I did not educate myself about security for Stickford Electric, I was the weakest layer of security. You are the most important layer of security. We must learn to use the native tools that FileMaker offers within the software. And we must not create our own tools. And we must avoid ersatz methods. So we've discussed the 5 questions we need to consider when developing a blueprint. The questions are, who does security impact? Security impacts people. It impacts the users, the FileMaker clients. It impacts the end users. It impacts the person or entity whose data are stored. And it impacts you as the developer. Why do we need security? We need security because there are external and internal threats. But more importantly, we need security to protect the business interests and operations in order that it can continue. And what is security? Security are the measures taken to guard against espionage or sabotage, crime, attack, or escape. And what we're seeking to protect is the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability, and the resilience of the assets. Security requires a defensive posture to protect the digital assets. When do we need security? We need security during planning, as well as ongoing and continuously, because the attackers are always watching, looking for opportunities to take advantage of a vulnerability, and the threats constantly change and evolve. Where do we need security? We need multiple layers of security and use the native security features offered to us within the platform. I didn't do a lot of demonstrations during this presentation. There were many good ones I found from prior years in videos, and they're linked here. And I highly recommend you reference these resources. And these links are live within the slides that will be available with my session materials to watch those slides, those demonstrations, and learn more about them. And Stephen Blackwell, FileMaker Security Expert's blog, keeps us apprised of new developments within security, so you can follow his blog as well. I appreciate the help and guidance of many people that have helped me. I especially appreciate the help of Mark LaRochelle of Productive Computing and Stephen Blackwell of Management Counseling Services. I feel like, in a sense, I'm standing on their shoulders. Thank you. I also had hours of help from my Toastmasters mentor, Sharon Silva, as well as Steve Romick of FileMaker, Wim DeCourt of Soliant Consulting, Tom Stickford of Stickford Electric, and Christy Wright of Business Boutique. I couldn't have done this without their help. There may be session updates, so check the website. Thank you for coming, and please make sure to fill out your session evaluations. If anyone has questions, please feel free to come use the microphone.
Hi. First of all, excellent presentation.
Oh,
wonderful.
Thank you.
The second thing is more just two really quick comments. You had made a note about having written documentation. And the only thing I'd like to add to that is make sure that that disaster recovery document, that needs to be stored two places. It needs to be with you, and it needs to be off-site in a secure location, because you know, you had your tornado and the hurricane there, and so if it's, you know, just next to the server, it's not going to be any good.
Yes.
And that happens a lot, especially in big companies, not just little ones. Little ones actually probably are better. The other thing is a lot of emphasis on the attack from outside, or the malicious attack from inside. But I think we also have to have security to guard against, and the best word that comes to mind right now is stupidity, where it's that unintentional, oh, I didn't mean to click there. You have someone who's not well trained, and you know, FileMaker's great because it saves automatically, but it also saves your deletions automatically. So those are just the two really quick comments. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Would that relate to the security is important for the end user?
Well, it's for the end user, but it's for you as a company or corporation too, right? Because you can have, you know, Joe who arrives first day and destroys your system very unintentionally. So he hasn't necessarily hurt himself, but he's hurt the company.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks a lot. I enjoyed that. I have two questions. First, does WebDirect present any particular security issues? And the second is, I have a client looking for two-level authentication, and I'm wondering what are the best ways to achieve that sort of in the current state of FileMaker?
The 2 layers of authentication?
The two-step authentication, yeah.
That would be if you're using an OAuth provider and using the authentication two-factor that...
It'll work with Azure, and it'll work with all the premises, Active Directory, and Staging. That's all I can tell you about that.
Yeah, they made mention of something coming. So it's best to go with the OAuth approach.
Well, only Azure AD.
Yeah, I'm not sure that...
Yeah. And
go ahead.
my other question was, does WebDirect present any particular problems outside of normal FileMaker client usage?
I missed the first part of your question.
Does WebDirect present any particular problems, security-wise?
I need to do some research.
A browser is inherently vulnerable. The question was with regard to any special vulnerabilities for WebDirect. A browser is an inherently vulnerable platform, but WebDirect works pretty well. It's not just the credentials; it's the the privilege set behind the account. One thing that you can do is make sure that privilege sets that support that users connect with WebDirect do not have connectivity via FileMaker Pro client. You just uncheck the little thing that says FM app, and that way somebody can't take a FileMaker Pro client, which has more capability of doing things that it shouldn't sometimes, or that we wouldn't want it to do, and you can block being able to connect with the FileMaker Pro client and allow people to connect only via WebDirect. Sorry about my voice. It's either this good dry Texas air or something in the atrium. And for those listening on the recording, this is Stephen H. Blackwell speaking.
Thank you all for coming. Were there any other questions?